Take my time today, it's not an easy game.
Hello? Have you ever imagined your dream life? We all have, but living that desired life in reality is a different story. If you could become a god and do anything you wanted, what choices would you make?
Not good.
The other day, InZOI face-planted into early access as a broken, unpolished, feature-deficient mess indistinguishable from the Girly Garbage that flooded Steam all those years ago, with the added expectation on consumers to do development for them through the use of derivative AI. Yet it's currently topping the Steam sales charts for one simple reason. It is, basically, the only high-profile attempt by a studio to create a competitor to the Sims series, a series which, outside of its endless barrage of microtransactions, has stayed dormant since the release of Sims 4 over a decade ago. The fact it was attempting to enter this cornered market is pretty much the one reason this game garnered as much attention as it did, becoming the most wishlisted game on Steam in the period following its announcement. And now that it's out, it's plain to see that it is shovelware, much like the day before it. So how come it hasn't been met with the same outrage? Well, my dear rhetorical question, it is because it is for girls. Let me qualify that statement. All games are for men. Some are for women. While there are some genres where it's more common to implement certain features in an effort to attract women, those efforts are often lackluster at best. InZOI is only the latest in a long line of these games. Take it away, harp sound effect. In the beginning, the world was stupid and pointless, and no one cared about anything, so everybody just farmed to pass the time, until they invented the Nintendo Entertainment System. It was a primitive device that you could not play Dark Souls on, but one positive aspect of it was that women could play on it, seeing as it was nothing but a stupid toy. But over time, game systems became more complicated in step with technological advancements to the point where it became a nerd thing. Now, everybody knows that girls can't be nerds, so when gaming was no longer a family activity, the market became divided between the main boy games with guns and swords and girl games about dress up and home decoration, the latter genre growing stagnant while the former saw much iteration. As less games were created with women in mind, we had to take what we could get, and this fed the perception of women as less discerning consumers. This paired with a biased idea of what women wanted from games led to a swath of shovelware being dumped onto the market in hopes that we would buy whatever cooking simulator or Barbie dress-up game we were served. And we did, for a while, but it wasn't especially successful in the long run. But instead of changing their approach, the industry said, women are too mysterious, and largely gave up trying to cater to ladies. This became a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it's since been a recurring thing throughout gaming history, despite the audience of girl gamers still being there. Less deliberately woman-oriented games like Animal Crossing or The Sims did manage to retain momentum. This is owed largely to the fact that they had layers beyond shallow appeals to gendered stereotypes, providing a similar escapism to those found in more mainstream, action-oriented, smelly boy games. We'll expand on how those games approached and in ways disregarded the question of gender a little later, but right now we're going to look at the reasons for why this pattern keeps repeating. 'Cause it do.
Yes.
In the wake of the Switch boom of 2020, we saw a resurgence of these short-sighted attempts to capture the female audience. I think we're at the tail end of this trend once again. But to see what powers the cycle of initial enthusiasm and subsequent decline toward these games, we first have to examine what pushes and pulls women to engage with genres that, in the reinforcement of gender roles, so glaringly clash with the escapism people come to games for in the first place. One could ask, if women want so badly to escape the pressures associated with gender, why are so many women still playing Housewives Simulator number gajillion billion? Or just generally very PG, non-goal-oriented games? Why do we so often find ourselves back in the kiddie pool? And often when you ask that question, people jump to saying, well, those are real games, which no, they're not.
Your stupid games are beginning to tire me.
These games generally have a way smaller scope, less engaging gameplay, and are made on a tight budget to condescendingly, somewhat, fill what is considered a secondary niche. Irregardless of that, women experience a lot of hostility when trying to branch out to other genres. It should come as no surprise that the popularity of dress-up games or farming simulators isn't because of some innate desire in women to tend to gardens or perform domestic chores. That perception is mostly an issue of survivorship bias. Women are less likely to be active and vocal in a games community if it's one that is outwardly hostile toward them. But while this problem is a major reason for the split in gender demographics in gaming, it doesn't provide the full picture. It explains what pushes women away from proper games, but it neglects the more complicated reasons so many are drawn to others in spite of their sexist undertones. So let's ask, what makes a game for girls? A pervasive characteristic of games with predominantly feminine communities is a comparative mundanity in contrast to the high-octane action of most games. Their non-violent gameplay systems and cutesy aesthetics represent a seemingly uncomplicated innocence. The player characters are mostly slender, graceful white women, and no matter how progressive they purport themselves to be, they still uphold the traditional Western ideal of womanhood. Though in spite of their problem, I do understand that for some women, they can act as a way to have one's performance of traditional femininity validated. Expectations that are by design impossible to fulfill in real life can be rendered down to systems that omit the supposed imperfections in our performance of gender. We can inhabit the role of women that, for all intents and purposes, shit glitter, as the saying goes. Though I hesitate to call this real escapism because the supposed catharsis they provide is invariably nestled within a patriarchal framework. The girly nature of these games turns away the kind of men who see enjoying that sort of media as gay, indirectly providing refuge from the external hostility in other genres. But it does not provide a space away from the ideas that underpin that hostility. The idea that women should like nonviolent gameplay systems is rooted in a perception of women as docile creatures. The true nature of this problem is often hand-waved with the phrase, "let girls be girly." It asks, what's so wrong about being girly? My little pink baby Hello Kitty gaming setup has nothing to do with the pressures associated with engaging in what is seen as a male interest. Why can't we like being little pink princesses? No one's saying you can't. Although often uttered by people who consider themselves left-wing, this phrase is built on a very narrow, conservative interpretation of what makes something girly in the first place. It inherently carries with it the implication that enjoying media outside of these genres is somehow non-girly. In no way does it deride non-normative gender expression, yet through its underlying assumptions, it still reinforces outdated ideals of womanhood. But that idea is a predictable symptom of a common reluctance around a wholesale deconstruction of gender norms, a desire to render conditions within the patriarchy more accommodating, despite the nature of that system as an inherently oppressive force, whose entire point is to not be accommodating. For example, many people cling on to the idea of positive masculinity, the idea that 90% of the things about masculinity are actually the bad kind. It's toxic masculinity, and the other kind is the good masculinity. No one really agrees on what that's supposed to be, but they do know that it's not the bad kind, and therefore we don't have to change too much. We can keep the idea of men and women as naturally inclined towards certain behaviors and interests, but you can't make genders equal while retaining a system built on separating them and valuing each one by different metrics. A response I often see when people complain about the sexualization of female characters is that it would be fine if only they sexualized the male characters equally. This is very silly, because male and female sexualization carry wholly different implications owing to the fact that neither take place in a vacuum. Unless you're into that sort of thing. If you want a game to truly be inclusive, then it has to account for all women. And to that you might say, well, that's impossible. You can't include every single type of woman. That would require infinite resources. And to that I say, you're looking at the issue backwards. It's not about putting in every single type of woman. It's about taking out assumptions of what a woman is supposed to be. Inclusivity is not inherently active or passive. I'm playing Dragon Age Veilguard, right now. A game that caused a stir because of forced inclusivity and DEI. But having queer people in an RPG where your protagonist is supposed to be a self-insert isn't forced at all. Having them in shouldn't be considered active because in reality the actual active choice is taking them out. What you're doing is reflecting reality, so if you skew reality by excluding very central elements to it, like what, 10% of people are queer? Or something, I don't know. Imagine if a new open world RPG came out tomorrow with no male option in the character creator. That should be considered no less weird than not having a non-binary option. Yet it's not. Now I think the best way to get around this is to simply take out the limiting factor from the outset. We don't need an extrinsic gender option. It pains me to say it, but the Demon's Souls remake actually got this right. And simply renaming male and female to body type A or B. The feminine option is still secondary B because of course it is, but it's good. And none of this would have happened without people banding together and pushing for change as a community. This speaks to the big role of collective action in driving change within the industry, and the power of fostering these inclusive communities through subtraction rather than simply piling on features to pander to women whose tastes in games are misunderstood by a male-dominated industry. Certain genres like RPGs or live sims have become popular with women precisely because they do not attempt to justify their presence. Those genres aren't attempting to fill a niche because their creative intent is not predicated on the idea of girl gamers as a secondary niche demographic. In action games, women are usually wearing skin-tight outfits and saying that even if you're a woman, hey, you can do stuff. And you can look hot doing it too. It's an attempt to create an empowered woman that lacks the crucial step of first examining one's own biases, because lines like this are created out of the assumption that a woman in power is something that has to be justified. However well-intentioned in their creation, they ultimately only reinforce the idea of women as secondary. It treats female agency as an abnormality. In Forspoken, the powers of Frey come from a male-coded magical vambrace, and her skill tree is centered around what else but her fucking manicure? Likewise, Bayonetta's abilities are tied to her hair, and she spends a large part of the game half naked. The contrasting of sexuality against badassery still divides these two aspects as feminine and masculine respectively. The agency of these characters is not portrayed as a nascent aspect of women, it is instead something borrowed from the sphere of masculinity. This is also why it's impossible to fix sexualization by dividing it equally across genders. Usually, when a man is sexualized, his power and agency is a central part of that sexuality, while the sexualization of characters like Bayonetta is instead a contrast to her power. As a character, she is a comment on the relationship between supposedly disparate characteristics. Creating these sexy but badass characters was the industry's primary response to its history of depicting powerless sexualized women. A somewhat half-hearted response, as the men making it were partially distracted by thoughts of how to most efficiently calculate jiggle physics. Bayonetta games are good, but touting Cereza as a feminist icon simply because she chooses to be sexy does not divorce the games from the trope they perpetrate. But in the old discourse, a lot of people omit direct critique of these problems by calling it boring. I want to question this tendency to only deride these tropes on the basis of being tired instead of openly calling out their problematic nature. But doing so is discouraged, as it often garners responses like, let people enjoy things, in the same vein that problematizing the relegation of women to non-violent gameplay genres, however voluntary, leads to the aforementioned let girls be girly response. But these issues do merit critique if we want a more equal community. Now more than ever do we require a more direct response than criticism based in the intermediary of a simple artistic frustration. It's reaching for some middle ground that simply doesn't exist. You can't argue with gamers. You have to shoot them. Let's not say Marvel Rivals female character designs are boring or repetitive. Let's take issue with the fact that they're, well, a naked appeal to the porn industry trying to replicate Overwatch.
I am ready to put on a show!
Its very overt and explicit pushing of spandex butt in your face is as off-putting as it is necessary. You need to present people who only understand what direction a line is supposed to go in with a business plan. Taking care to not use words with more than 2 syllables, you need to give them simple reasons for why previous successes within your game's genre make infinity money. And then you're going to explain to them how you're going to make more infinity money by doing the thing harder. It's a little short-sighted, and it has to be, because financial reports are quarterly. One of the main draws of Overwatch is that it has, say it with me now, a diverse array of characters, something Marvel Rivals doesn't really have. Sure, Marvel Rivals has higher player counts now when it's new and shiny, but I don't see it holding up years down the line because it simply doesn't have the same legs to stand on when such a central feature in a hero shooter as aesthetics are cynically predicated on the simple idea that sex sells. The only thing that people actually like about that fucking game is the shark, so what I'm getting at here is that the simple reproduction of surface level elements misses the reasons behind the enduring success of certain games. Like I said, the optimal way of pitching a game is to promise you do more of the thing that makes money. It's a lot harder to sell someone on the absence of something. Now, cozy games with their simple gameplay systems can be made cheap. They put more effort toward the implementation of supposedly feminine themes because they assume women are not as discerning an audience. Again, surface level aspects are replicated while misunderstanding the game's true appeal. In 2020, when Animal Crossing blew up in the mainstream, the fellas saw dollar signs. And looking through a single-minded business perspective, it's not surprising that CEOs saw women like this thing because it's women's stuff. So let's make it more women's stuff. Classics of the cozy game genre that cemented its popularity with women like Stardew Valley or The Sims did not focus on shallow stereotypes. They don't center dated masculine ideals and as such evade the toxicity common among the type of men that desire the validation of getting to be big muscly man. This has the knock-on effects of creating more accepting communities because there's nobody there to push women away. Their non-violence does not condescend their female audience because it's not shaped by the assumption that girls only like cute little baby games. Even though the activities in those games are ones classically associated with the feminine sphere, that baggage isn't present. This comes from an absence of coding the activities in games as girly. The content of these games is still read as girly and therefore girls like it because it's girl, yet the actual appeal of them is the complete inverse of this. As such, we've seen a reevaluation on the part of the audience of what makes a cozy game. A bunch of RPGs like Skyrim are cozy games to people now, and the ones that feature character customization, especially the success of games with that feature, is mistakenly attributed to girls getting to play dress up. But really it's because the fact that it costs too much money to account for both genders and write a bunch of stuff around that means that they can't be annoying about it, and it doesn't get in the way of good gameplay and stuff. In the end, the main thing to take away from this should be pretty obvious. You don't have to do any heavy-handed pandering and make everybody uncomfortable and mad if you just don't make a deal out of gender in the first place. Ultimately, gender is something, they just invented that to sell you gas station dick pills, I think. So the question in the end becomes, what do you do about the whole thing? And I think we should start making games that are anti-man. Think about it. There's a market for it. There are long lists of games on Steam that are purportedly anti-male that men are making because they want to pretend that there are games that aren't for them. If we make some anti-man games and then we make the rest of the games normal and disregard gender as a thing, just like play fucking video game, then
Say 3, profit. I get it.
That's it for this one. Thank you very much for watching. I've been Oatmeal. I hope you have a beautiful day. I love you.
Come on down to one, two, now. It's not enough.